Come on the air right now. We are following that breaking news out of Memphis. All 5 police officers involved in the fatal confrontation case of 29-year-old TYRENE NICHOLS are behind bars right now. In just a few hours, we were expecting a live update from the Shelby County DA. Former federal prosecutor Paul Butler is joining us right now as well. We have a reporter on the ground, Antonia Hilton, who is there. We're going to get to her in a moment, too. Paul, I want to walk folks through what happened here. We know about the death of TYRENE NICHOLS. He was attacked, in the words of his family's attorney, like a human piñata by these officers. The family has seen video of what happened. This happened earlier in the month on January 7th. He ended up dying 3 days later. The police chief in Memphis there has called the actions of the 5 officers, all of whom happen to be black, saying that it was heinous, reckless, and inhumane, and making a plea to the residents of that city to protest peacefully when video of the arrest is released to the public, which is expected to happen today. Again, of course, the breaking news is that these 5 individuals who were fired a matter of days ago have now all been taken into custody. Your takeaways about the situation here and the way this investigation is progressing?
So the officers were fired almost immediately for using excessive force and also for violating their responsibilities to intervene. When one officer is doing something that's illegal or criminal, other officers are required to stop that person as they would any other criminal. The police department alleges that in this instance, those officers violated that duty. They also had a duty to render aid to Mr. NICHOLS, which they also violated. So it's not surprising, given the quickness with which the department was responsible for firing these guys, that now we're seeing criminal charges. In addition, an autopsy commissioned by the family says that Mr. NICHOLS died of extensive bleeding caused by a severe beating. He bled out basically based on what the police did. In these cases, often there's a debate about whether what the officers did was the actual cause of the death. So if there's a trial, I expect that to be an issue. But again, criminal charges aren't that surprising given what we think the video shows. Soon we'll all see it, and also given how quickly they were discharged by the police department.
And again, real concerns, Paul, in that community as they anticipate the release of that video. Ben Crump, the attorney who represents the NICHOLS family and was among those family members who were able to see the video, says that the video shows that TYRENE NICHOLS, a 29-year-old FedEx worker and a father, was shocked, pepper sprayed, and restrained when he was pulled over for a traffic stop near his home on January 7th. We're also joined now by Antonia Hilton. She is on the ground for us there in Tennessee, and we were anticipating this to be a tense day in that community, Antonia. Obviously, developments are occurring rapidly right now with expectation. We're going to hear from the DA in the not-too-distant future. Can you take us there and tell us what more you're learning?
Hey, Peter, it's not just a tense day. It's been a tense several days here as I've been on the ground and talking to residents. I've even spoken to members of the police department here, and there's immense hurt. There's also some gratitude that it appears that action has been taken swiftly. People have been talking about the potential for criminal charges for a while, and so this community is going to hear this news that NBC News and others have confirmed that these 5 officers are in custody and are facing criminal charges now. And we also understand that while we're going to hear more about this at a 2 p.m. local time, 3 p.m. Eastern time presser shortly, that the video we're likely going to get tomorrow. And people here are grateful for this in some ways. While this is incredibly painful, it touches on all of the stories that you and I have covered many times of the lack of trust between communities, particularly Black communities, and police. There's a recognition here that the police department acted very quickly in not just putting them on administrative leave, not just saying for a while that they were going to investigate, but very quickly firing these officers. Also, 2 members of the fire department being put immediately on leave, relieved of their duties and under investigation as well. There's a recognition that there are local, state, and federal agencies here who are promising this community that they're going to give them eventually a full report, a full accounting soon of what happened here. And so some of the tenseness, some of the anger is tempered by what they feel is a respect that they're receiving from authorities in this case, which Black community members that I've spoken to say that in some ways it's a surprise to them. They come to these stories time and time again, expecting to be stonewalled, expecting to get very little information, expecting to have to beg. And that this time, at least, there is a silver lining that they feel like, particularly there's been talk about, the new police chief who's been in her job for a relatively short amount of time, just how quickly and effectively she has communicated to the community. There is appreciation for that. But people are bracing for the reality that this video is expected to be horrific, not just for people locally to process, but likely for this entire country, Peter.
That police chief promising full and complete cooperation with the state and federal authorities, Antonio, who are involved in the investigation right now. As you just reported, the expectation is that we would see that video publicly likely tomorrow. The pledge had been made by the authorities there that it would happen over the course of this week or next week, but it could happen now, we're learning, within the next 24 hours or so. Paul, I do want to ask you, we expect to hear later this afternoon from attorneys for at least 2 of those 5 officers. We're going to hear from the DA, as Antonio was telling us about a short time from now as well. What are you going to be listening for as we hear from that district attorney shortly?
Well, Peter, we know that the traditional tactic of defense attorneys in cases like this is to blame the victim. So I expect that we'll hear a lot about Mr. Nichols and what he did, and not as much about the police officers and what they did. I do think, though, that there's a lot more confidence in the criminal legal system, and that may be why there won't be a violent reaction to the video, as sickening as it will be to watch. We've seen convictions in high-profile cases. Obviously, Derek Chauvin convicted of murder in the case in Chicago involving Laquan McDonald. Officer Van Dyke was convicted of murder in that case. So with more confidence in the criminal legal system and more officers being prosecuted for excessive force, I think that we will see a peaceful reaction in Memphis.
Yeah, I think all Americans agree that's what we hope to see as well. Paul Butler, you're going to stick with us. Antonia Hilton, you're on the ground there. We're letting you keep doing some reporting. We will check in with you as we learn anything more. Again, those 5 officers accused for their roles in the death of TYRENE Nichols earlier this month are now in custody. We'll have the latest when we hear from the district attorney coming up as well. There is another headline we're watching here today, and that's President Biden, who is heading to Virginia just across the river later this hour with a potentially huge opportunity in front of him. He's going to try to contrast the better than expected economic progress on his watch with what the White House is calling irresponsible fiscal plans coming from House Republicans. That includes demanding deep spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt ceiling, a strategy that Speaker Kevin McCarthy agreed to pursue in exchange for votes during negotiations over his speakership. But Republicans have not been specific about what kind of cuts they want, leaving Democrats and President Biden to fill in the blanks.
What is your plan to address your concerns? Is it to radically cut Social Security? Show us the plan. Radically cut Medicare? Show us the plan.
If they want to enact broad and deep cuts to Medicare and Social Security, and that's their starting point, then that's not anything we're going to entertain.
Those are the words of Hakeem Jeffries and Pete Aguilar, 2 of the top Democrats in the House. And while some Republicans, including former President Trump, have said Social Security and Medicare should not be touched, that would make their goal of balancing the budget nearly impossible. Take a look at this estimate. It shows that if you leave entitlements and defense spending alone, don't do anything to it, you would have to cut 85% of everything else in order to make it work. I want to bring in NBC's Carol Lee, who covers the White House with me. Matthew Dowd is MSNBC senior political analyst, and Simone Sanders Townsend is the host of Simone right here on MSNBC, also notably former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris. Carol, to you first. The president clearly sees an opportunity here. He's trying to draw a sharp contrast with Republicans kind of test driving this message for what is a possible re-election campaign coming up. What do we anticipate we're going to hear from him?
Well, Peter, I think according to the White House, what you're going to hear from the president is that contrast of the president trying to make the case that Republicans are pushing for proposals that would hurt middle-class Americans, while the president is focused on implementing laws that he passed during his first 2 years in office, some of them bipartisan, that he says are going to continue to show benefits to the American people, and pointing to some of those numbers that you've referenced in terms of economic data. So he's also going to announce, we're told, this Invest in America cabinet. That's what the White House is calling it. And essentially this, Peter, is members of the president's cabinet, secretaries of energy, transportation, commerce, other agencies that have a piece of these laws that the president signed that are going to be implemented. And the goal here, according to the White House, is for these secretaries to keep that momentum up on the economy and to focus on implementing the provisions in these laws. And all of this, Peter, comes against that backdrop, as you said, of the president who's likely and expected to be gearing up for a 2024 campaign.
Matthew, I want to read for you what one of our colleagues, Sahil Kapoor, wrote about this box that Republicans are finding themselves in. He writes in part, quote, Republicans are divided over whether Medicare and Social Security spending should be on the chopping block. They are split over whether military funding should be on the table. They're firmly opposed to new tax revenues to reduce the debt. They say they're willing to cut domestic non-defense spending, but that's a limited slice of the budget pie that would not fulfill many conservatives' demands to balance the budget. So if they can't figure out what they're asking for, how does that bode for negotiations over the debt ceiling going forward?
Well, they built the box they're in, and they've built it over the time, over the last few years, as you know, Peter, in this. I mean, what's striking also to me, you add all what you just said and laid out of how they've created this box that they really can't get out of. They have also tried to brand themselves as fiscal conservatives, but through the entire Trump presidency, they had no desire, zero desire, when the deficit grew at the largest rate it's grown in our history, zero desire to rein in any spending and anything that would bring the budget closer to balance in that time frame. So I don't think they care about governing. I think they care about making statements. I think this is why the White House and the Democrats are smart to keep saying, just tell us what you're doing, just tell us what you're doing, instead of the White House and the House Democrats offering details or here's a plan out of this. Make the Republicans do what they are unwilling to do, which is form a sense of governance and then present it, because I don't think they want to do that.
And Simone, then, of course, there's the hypocrisy here, right? A lot of the conservatives who were fine with raising the debt ceiling when Donald Trump was president are now saying that they will not do it.
Yeah, Peter, it is. Well, first, if I may, on TYRENE Nichols, I think it's really important to note that being pulled over by police officer, if you are Black in America, you should not wonder if you will leave that traffic stop allowing TYRENE Nichols to be alive today. On this thing about the budget and the hypocrisy, under President Trump, Republicans raised the debt ceiling 3 times without any fanfare. And President Trump, as we all know, contributed to the deficit by more than double digits. The debt ceiling is always a fight, but what makes this different this time around is that we are coming very, very, very close to completely appending our economic system as we know it, okay? Fiddling with the full faith and credit of the United States of America, defaulting on our bills. It is, the conversation that is being had out there, I think is disingenuous, but it is confusing for the American public. Because if you are someone that does not do this every day, right, the political professionals here, reporters on this panel, are in the weeds of it, but the American people are not. And it is not clear to folks that this is actually not about new spending. I asked Heather Boucher, who is on the President's Council of Economic Advisors, what comes next, because they have said the White House is not negotiating. But if Republicans are not moving and the White House is not negotiating, how does this end? I would note they didn't really have an answer.
Yeah, Matthew, as we talk about this, there's also talk floating around this week about a Republican bill that would abolish the IRS, would impose a 30% national sales tax. The Democrats obviously have pounced on that. Here's what Kevin McCarthy said when he was asked about it.
Do you support the fair tax? Do you support the fair tax?
You can hear him say no there. Well, you can probably not hear him say no there, but he said no there. The suffice to say, he does not support this. But this fair tax, as it's described, the Democrats view as a real opportunity to try to pounce on the Republican suggestion that a 30% sales tax would be the way to get the revenue that they're looking for, while not having this, income tax that Democrats obviously say should be targeting the most wealthy in this country. What do you make of the messaging here by the Republicans and as you said, this box that they're in?
Well, it's both fiscal and political insanity that people would be proposing this in the middle of this. And I think the president, and I think he is going to in his talk, it has a great opportunity not only to lay out all the ways the economy is growing, but then present the idea that our economy can still go under. And here's how it can go under, which is incredible dysfunction and what the Republicans are proposing or what they're pushing for, both on the debt ceiling and on this crazy sales tax that would raise every person's taxes, but more specifically, people of middle and low income by much larger degrees than people of higher income. But I have not, watching the Republicans the last few years, I cannot find a strategy in what they're doing that is open to the majority of the American public. So when you're crazy, you say crazy things.
Simone, Americans historically, they have trusted Republicans for the issue of the economy more than they have Democrats. Is it a mistake for Democrats to think this time would be different?
Well, look, Peter, I think we need to ask ourselves why that is. And it is because Republicans have very good talking points. My Republican friends have done a great job at positioning themselves as the party who is good on the economy, who is good on taxes, who fights for the little guy. But if you look at the policies, that has not bared itself to be true. And so what I think Democrats have to do is continue to call things out, to have their facts, but also to talk about what they have done or are doing to affect people's pocketbooks and their livelihoods. And I think we saw a lot of that from Democrats toward the end of last year. And I think that's what we're going to continue to hear from all of them, but especially from the White House.
Let's go forward. Let's go forward. Let's go forward. I can't take this no more. You know good and well that they messed up. Everybody has messed up. Too many crooks in the pile.
Barrage of missiles overnight across that country.
Too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many crooks in the pile. Now it's starting to come back on all of them. I want to see some more about this Memphis deal. That upsets me. The whole thing upsets me. The whole thing upsets me because it all falls back on what didn't happen. It should have happened in the late 80s that has put us where we are right now. And that's the thing about so many people around here that could have affected this outcome by supporting this ministry and chose not to. Because they was either scared of it or didn't understand it or didn't believe it or didn't like me or whatever. But it has really thrown a monkey wrench in the pile.
Has proven that it's not capable of operating its prisons in a way that's fair and that meets the standard of equal justice under the law. So the feds have to step in a way that's stronger than what they've done in the past.
Paul Butler, Katie Beck on the ground for us in South Carolina. Both of you, we appreciate. Thanks so much. RNC leadership showdown, the new challenge from the right over who should take on the GOP party chair seat. That's next.
Let's go forward. Let's go. Hold up. No, keep going. Keep going. We don't want that. That may be. Nope. We don't want that neither. How about that?
Well, I think Vaughn's just news that he just mentioned that Ron DeSantis has decided to weigh in, I think could have some effect. My guess is in these, and I haven't gone through these before when I worked for President Bush, in the midst of that, is these things are very insider baseball. It's 168 members. Usually the chair does a lot of care and feeding of those individual members and doesn't have to do a lot. They just need 85 votes to become chair, or she just needs 85 votes to keep the chair of the committee. What's amazing to me, I mean, what's really amazing to me, under any normal circumstance, Ronna McDaniel would be gone. She became chair. She lost badly in 2018. She lost again in 2020, and she really lost again in 2022. And the interesting thing about Ronna McDaniel is she made mention, she's from Michigan, and she made mention she put a special emphasis on Michigan about taking Michigan back. And what happened in Michigan is the Democrats, for the first time in 40 years, hold all the statewide offices and all the branches of government, first time in 40 years. And so to me, the argument is over somebody that incompetently ran the RNC versus people that were so far right that their candidates they supported couldn't win. And that choice is such a bizarre thing to me, that somebody hasn't surfaced that's sort of a normal human being that knows how to run elections. But the choice is that, and that really is reflective of the Republican Party.
Matthew Dowd, we appreciate your expertise and your perspective on Hilliard and beautiful, but it turns out breezy Dana Point, California this morning. Vaughn, thank you so much as well. Next, Trump's social media comeback. The former president allowed back on Facebook and Instagram why the company says they made the decision amid his push for the presidency.
Why does something like that even get on news right now? That's just free airtime. Free airtime that people could, a lot of people could care less about. Here we go. Here's Memphis.
How tense is it?
Back it up. 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 Right there. Oh.
% dust free and delivers right to my door. Ready to make.
Go forward. Just a couple. Right there. Right there. Right there.
Twitter.com.
All right. Let's listen. Let's listen up.
Good to be with you. I'm Judy Tur. All 5 of the officers involved in the traffic stop that preceded the death of TYRENE Nichols are now in jail. They are charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and aggravated kidnapping. We are awaiting an update from the Shelby County District Attorney that is set to begin soon. We're also awaiting the release of video taken during that traffic stop that ended in a violent confrontation between Nichols and the officers. The family of TYRENE Nichols has seen that video. They say police officers beat him for 3 minutes. Nichols died in the hospital 3 days later. Joining me now from Memphis is NBC's Antonia Hilton. Antonia, the lawyers for the Nichols family have compared the footage, this body cam footage, to the beating of Rodney King. What more can you tell us, and how tense is it right now in Memphis as we await the release of this video?
Katie, it's been tense here for days now, and people have been anticipating this, not just in news from, local officials, the NAACP, from the family, but, in whispers among Black residents here in the city, that this is going to be horrific, hard to stomach, hard to watch. But the news now that these 5 officers are in custody, that they are facing serious criminal charges that range from aggravated kidnapping to misconduct to, most importantly, second-degree murder charges, that's been met as a relief by some people here, because communities like Memphis, they've been here before, where they feel like they've had to beg and plead for this level of charges. They've had to beg and plead for body camera video, for respect and communication from officials. The one silver lining here is that they feel like not only did the police department move very quickly to fire these officers, but that second-degree murder charges reflect what the community has been expecting. That when we see this, it's going to look like a horrible, essentially an execution in the view of many people living here. I actually even spoke to one police officer here in Memphis who themselves was emotional about all of this and how her...
Okay, you see that picture of him right there? See that picture? Now let's go back to this other picture whenever he was laying in the hospital. Look, see that indention right there in his skull?
And plead for body camera video.
You see that indention in his skull right there? That looks to me like a billy stick. And it looks to me like somebody had to have caved in the skull right there in order to make such of an indention like that. And the reason why I say that is because you can go, I mean, it's not like it's the
one silver lining.
It's not like it's a birthmark. You don't see no indention in his head right there. So obviously that indention come from somebody hitting him very, very hardly with a billy stick or something.
Did the police department move very quickly to fire these officers, but that second-degree murder charges reflect what the community has been expecting. That when we see this, it's going to look like a horrible, essentially an execution in the view of many people living here. I actually even spoke to one police officer here in Memphis who themselves was emotional about all of this and how horrific it's going to be to process. And so the one piece that people are grateful for is that the police chief, who she's relatively new here, has, in their view, stepped up, communicated clearly, acted really swiftly, and that these charges represent what the community thinks these officers deserve, Katie.
No, Antonio, this traffic stop happened on January 7th. He died 3 days later. It's been building out there, but for anybody who might not be familiar with the details of this case, can you just run us through the basics? What happened? When did it happen? And how did we get to the point where we are today?
Absolutely. One of the first things I should say, though, is that we're still waiting on a full report. Perhaps we'll hear more about that at this 2 p.m. Local time, 3 p.m. Eastern presser that's going to happen in just a few minutes here at the DA's office. But what we understand is TYRENE Nichols was arrested during a traffic stop. They accused him of recklessly driving, and that traffic stop then very quickly escalated. From people who have seen the video, they say that not only are we going to see 3 minutes of beating, but we're also going to see use of things potentially like pepper spray and tasers that this was incredibly, incredibly violent. People have been saying that a traffic stop of this nature shouldn't have escalated to what we're going to see. And I should note that NBC News has confirmed through multiple sources that we're not going to get this video this afternoon. It's not coming when we are going to be at this press conference shortly. We're going to see this video likely tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening. But the investigations are also ongoing here. Local, state, and a federal civil rights investigation. And so the community is expecting reports and, of course, through the body camera video, a better understanding of what transpired here. For many people, how a traffic stop escalates to this point and results in someone dead 3 days later, it's very hard without some of those blanks filled in at this time to make sense of any of that.
What'd they say, another Rodney King deal that happened in Los Angeles? That poor man. Kind of like George Floyd over a supposedly $20 it's hard for me to talk right now because with it being so close and to know how much that I have struggled towards wanting to see peace and utopia, the love of the Heavenly Father in a revival, and to think that this nation has been paralyzed on account of this, and as soon as they do let it out to the public, in which I don't know, maybe they're editing some of it, I don't know. God only knows what it's going to cause as far as rioting. It's unbelievable how far that the police officers can go in an event towards there's no obvious threat pertaining to a gun, or a knife or any of the above, that these police officers get caught up in this satanic spirit. And this satanic spirit takes all 5 police officers over, basically bewitching them. That turns this into what it is turning into. It's still in the developmental stage towards evolving. We're living in some sad, perilous times because of decision making that should have been made properly going back 30 plus years ago. So sad.
Do we know the nature?
We're still waiting on that full report.
Do we know the nature of the traffic stop? What he was pulled over for exactly?
Recklessly driving, Katie, but what recklessly driving means, it's hard to say without, full information here. And this is a person who, has a reputation in the community for he's a father, he works at FedEx, he is beloved by so many people, he was a skater, he had a ton of hobbies, lots of friends. This is not a person who had not that frankly, a death, this type of death is deserved by anyone. But for so many people, this has been so shocking to process because this is someone who, was so beloved and so friendly and so social and publicly out in the community and supported by so many people that even understanding just the nature of recklessly driving in a traffic stop, for people that I've spoken to, it's hard to wrap their minds around. And so I think that's why you see so many people waiting to see this video. They know it's going to be horrible, but they want to see it because they do not understand any other way right now, Katie.
Antonia Hilton. Antonia, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And joining me now is civil rights attorney, former Brooklyn prosecutor, and MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman, also retired Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best. She's also an MSNBC law enforcement analyst. So it's clearly very tense in Memphis, as Antonia was laying out. But there are signs that that tension is spreading throughout the country. Just a couple minutes ago, in fact, Steve Cohen, the congressman who represents Memphis, said this on the floor: it could be a situation where people want to exercise their First Amendment rights to protest actions of the police department, and people should, but they should be peaceful and calm. He also said we have a new DA, we have a new U.S. attorney, and we have a new police director. They are the right people at the right time to bring about reform and see that in this case, justice is rendered. Carmen, if you were a police chief right now in Seattle, what would you be preparing for?
The worst.
Yeah, well, Katie, I can tell you that police chiefs across the country are preparing for, demonstrations, protests, potentially civil unrest. It's very reminiscent of Rodney King. All indications and information are that the video is pretty horrific. Kudos, if you will, to Chief C.J. Davis. I know her personally. She is upstanding. She is swift to take action and make sure there's accountability in this process. That doesn't negate the fact that it's going to be very disturbing to see this, and people fully expect that there will be a reaction. Most police chiefs, as I would do, are reaching out to the communities of color and their community-based organizations to start developing that dialogue right now about the potentiality for problems and for violence, because no one wants to see, a violent outcome.
I don't have words to express how heartbroken that I am with that being that close to where I live here in Northwest Tennessee, in Shelby County. It is so depressing to see a great nation torn apart like this, to be ravaged again and again and again, pertaining to these demonic forces that are working, just as the Bible talks about, coming down in great wrath, because it knoweth its time is short. And until we get a handle on this, I continue to keep repeating this almost now recently in almost every video, until we get a handle on this, that we're dealing with a supernatural spiritual war that is now seeping into a human form pertaining to how that people are reacting and responding to various situations. Until we get a handle on this, it's only going to get worse. There was a purpose that God led me of going to a festival in Davidson County in 2005 after my wife decided to walk out of my life because I'd stood back up for the Lord Jesus Christ. There was a purpose that I went down to the farmer's market and found somebody with a art brush that was spraying, at the time, t-shirts, and I got him to write a bloody road ahead with the four horsemen on one side, the Juby Jackson story, just one drop of blood washed away my sins. There was a purpose that I sent that to the 43rd president. And it was in regards towards a warning or an advisory. Homeland Security got involved, and the next thing you know, I get sent to a mental institution because of trying to help my people. I have been harassed and tormented and torn apart since 40 plus years ago, whenever those two hands miraculously saved my life, that I can't even begin to express the detail and the depth of remorse that I have for this great nation.
Charles, we have not yet seen the video. Obviously, we're going to have to wait. But just on first glance, I mean, it's hard to understand how anybody gets stopped for a traffic stop and then ends up 3 days later dead. How does this keep happening? I mean, how are you not aware, if you're a police officer, of the moment we are in and the consequences that are out there and the public outrage that comes with it, that your actions are being watched? How does this keep on happening?
Well, you know, Katie, when you were talking about the congressman from Memphis and his comments about this being the right person for the right time at this job, my immediate thoughts were the right person for the right job with respect to what has happened here. This would not have happened. And so that's very difficult for us to swallow. I think it's important for us to...
Exactly. The right person with the right job would be able to control his men, would be able to control his regime, regardless whether it was a Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee regime or any other type of regime. But once more, if your men is not grounded, and if they haven't had proper discipline training, and if you allow for that demonic spirit to take control, this is the end results, my friend. It's 1,000 wonders that with me being agitated and aggravated as much as what I was, I'm going to estimate in total probably well over 100 guns has been pulled on me in one time or another. I had a helicopter with 2 missile launchers on it pointing at me. It's 1,000 wonders that it had to be solely by the act of God, and it had been solely because I surrendered and I immediately offered cooperation 100% whenever they told me to do whatever that they told me to do. But as many times as I'm going to say not 100 guns, probably more like 200 or 300 guns. As many times as I've been messed with by the American authorities in some form or fashion, it's 1,000 wonders, and it's only been because of God protecting me that some cop, especially up in Land Between the Lakes, whenever you're out there in the middle of the woods and you know that there's no cameras, there's nobody videoing nobody, you don't think that them men know that? You don't think that them men take advantage of that whenever they're out there in the middle of nowhere and they can basically say that you pulled a knife on them or that you threatened them or you done this or you done that? It's 1,000 wonders that I have not been worn completely out or shot or beaten to death such as this individual right here. It's only been by the hand of God that I can make these videos.
Understand the conversation that many of us have been having for a very long time, and I've said it before on this program, on this platform, many times, that American police are not cultured in a spirit of service and protection. They are cultured in a spirit of violence and aggression. And that is why you get a situation where someone is stopped for reckless driving and 3 days later ends up dead. There is literally no excuse for this. I firmly believe, even though this would be filling in the blanks at this point, and I understand that.
Look at this. Look at this profile right here. See what I'm saying?
And that my legal education tells me not to do too much of this. I will say that if there were the presence of a weapon or a deadly weapon by the victim in this case, we would have likely heard about it at this point. It would have been leaked. I am not going as far as to say that the person was totally unarmed, but what I will say is that when you're talking about the use of force by 5 different police officers to subdue a suspect who has been pulled over in a traffic stop. There's no indication that this individual was armed as of yet with the information that has come out. There's no indication that he posed a deadly threat such that was required that 3 minutes of a lethal beating was necessary in order to eliminate the potential threat. The answer to your question, Katie, is a cultural one. It is a cultural one regarding how American police are taught to deal with American citizens, particularly American citizens from Black and brown and underserved and underrepresented communities.
That's part of it. That's part of it. That's part of it. You know what the other part is? Is that our judicial system has let this fester and go and go and go to the point that most people that are hoodlums, and I'm not saying that this guy was, because obviously he must have had a good, clean record, but most people know that whenever they get out here and do a heinous crime, the odds of some judge actually penalizing them the way that they should have been punished is about slim to none in America because of all the liberal attorneys and liberal judges. But yet no, somebody like Jimmy Swaggart, I'm just going to throw his name out there real quick, or somebody such as myself that's a born-again Christian, we're going to attack these people. We're going to crucify them. We're going to put them on the cross, and we're going to make a public display out of them, an example, so that everybody can watch. Well, you know what? You've made your example. You've made your example. But now your example is backfiring, Kenton, Tennessee. Now your example is backfiring, Martin, Tennessee, and Dresden, Tennessee, and Land Between the Lakes, and Trigg County, Kentucky, and Marshall County, and all the other different places that I've had run-ins with them up there in Kentucky. Now it's backfiring, Davidson County, Shelby County, and other places that I've had run-ins with the police department, including Oklahoma, and yes, Atlanta, Georgia. So I say this with an open heart. I say this in giving my fullest condolences to the family and the friends pertaining to this death of this young man, this individual. I say this with all compassion, that the group of people that this is happening to again and again and again and again, regardless whether it be George Floyd or the Rodney King beatings or what happened up in Portland, Oregon, or what's happened whenever other events has taken place towards seeing all these outlandish outbreaks, it couldn't have happened to a better group of people. Because they have chosen this. They have chosen this, and because they have chosen this, I hope that they inhale this and swallow this, and maybe they'll hail themselves. Hey, hell, hell, hell! Good, what a good job you done! mayor of Kenton, Tennessee. You tried to attack and kill your third son that recently had 9 units of blood formed into his body that had to have his spleen removed because of a car accident. I hope the Crosses and the Brundridges and all the other names that I continue to keep mentioning pertaining to the people that knows me personally, that has been involved in my life in one form or fashion, including my previous family members or prior family members that I've had. I hope that they accept this for their own accountability issues pertaining to the grief and despair that they have brought upon to the lives of the innocent. Just like the shootings in California we just witnessed, just like the shootings in Texas last year of the school shooting, just like all the other school shootings. When is it going to stop? This is beyond insanity pertaining to what has went on. And until it surfaces the way that it's supposed to surface, and until we see a mighty movement of God pertaining to the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help us God, it's only going to get worse. So I hope the Moores up in Dresden, Tennessee, the judge, I hope the Pences, I hope all these other local attorneys around here and so-called law enforcement agencies, I hope they swallow it hook, line, and sinker, because it couldn't have happened to a better group of people. Especially with the group of people over in Kenton, Tennessee, that where all this originated from. They wanted to brand me. And by them wanting to brand me, now they've branded themselves. It's backfired on them. And I can only say, with a grieving, hemorrhaging spirit, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Because I know that God's will be done. And if this is what it takes to turn this around, well, then so be it. They have brought this upon to themselves because they wanted to formulate a resistance movement against the very person that helped them establish nuclear arms agreement between the superpowers. And unless you fully know my story about in detail of the things that I've been talking about now on social media platform for the past 3 to 5 years, you're not either not going to believe it, or you're not going to be able to accept it, or you're going to think that I'm just lying and telling a bunch of fibs or whatever. But those that know me and know what I went through, especially my son, my only biological son, that is still to this day acting belligerent, misbehaving, disrespectful, rude, cold, callous. I could go on and on with words towards as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you would think somebody just got through sending them a baby crater jumper. You'd think that they'd at least had the decency of texting me and saying, "Hey, Dennis, we appreciate that gift that you gave us pertaining to that little jumper. You put wheels on it and got the little stars and all the little things, the little whatnots that the kids can play on." I found it up here at Walmart. It was on clearance. But I mean, I still gave my money. It was still my hard-earned cash. Cost $26 just to send it from Brownsville, Tennessee to Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, it was fairly heavy, probably 10, 12, 15 pounds. But don't even have the decency of texting me and saying thank you. What has happened to this great nation? The devil has taken this nation over. That's what's happened to this nation. And now we are seeing the festation where even the Bible talks about, for your house has been left desolate. This is what happens whenever your house becomes desolate. And the only way that your house can become desolate is that at one time or another, your house had to have a residency about it. Because if it never has had a residency, you got to look at the house towards it being an empty house. Well, it's just an empty house. Never has had no residency in that particular house. And the house that I'm talking about is our bodies on a personal level, our community on a spread out level, our states and our nation on a much bigger level. And then, of course, if you go with the planet, now you got it. But our house has been left desolate. In other words, at one time, the Holy Father used to protect our great nation, that now has lifted his protected hand because of all the wickedness. And it says in the Bible that he will turn from a wicked nation and allow for the wicked to basically engulf the wicked. He will give them over to a reprobate mind, let them believe a lie, and be damned. And I continue to keep saying that, and I'm going to continue to keep saying that as long as I have breath in my lungs, and as long as I can push the button on this particular phone and video stuff like this. I'm going to continue to say the same thing, just like a broken record, just like deja vu, just like anybody else that repeats their message, Groundhog's Day or whatever. I'm going to continue to stay with the story. This is my story, just like the country song, and I'm sticking to it. And all I can do is just sit in misery, and watch what's happening towards my country being torn apart. But the people that it's being torn apart with, those are the people that have inherited, a lot of them. Some of these people that's been in power for 25, 30 plus years, those was the people that could have had an effect on what's happening right now, that because of what that they didn't do has now put us where we're at today. But so many good men and women working in and with the police force, their hands has been tied for one reason or the other, and they have basically inherited this daggone mess. You talk about feeling sorry for a group of people. I feel so sorry for the new men and women that's coming into the police force, regardless whether it's local, state, or federal, Homeland Security, whoever, that now they're having to inherit this, that obviously those before them that created this, those that got fat because of this, fat in their own pockets and their bank accounts, and they wound up with nice cars, nice homes, etc., etc., etc. I could go on and on. They wound up gaining, and to this day, they still haven't been held accountable for their actions. In the meantime, the people that's doing the suffering are the people that's having to sacrifice the most, and those are the people that didn't have nothing to do with those choices that was made 30 plus years ago. You don't think that those people's going to be held accountable for how that this country has been torn apart like this? Huh.
Well, we know that
if they're not, I'm just hypothetically speaking here. If they're not, I'm going to be like Billy Graham that made a statement, I think it was in the early 90s, that if God did not come back and bring judgment upon this great nation, that he was going to have to go back and apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah for destroying their city. And I can basically say the same thing. That if God ain't going to hold these people accountable towards what happened, when it happened, going back in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, if they don't hold these people accountable, then God's going to have to go back and apologize to a whole lot of people. And I don't think God's going to apologize to nobody. I think it's going to be the other way around. These people are going to be held accountable. All these churches that I spread all this material to, going house to house, going car to car, going hand to hand, starting out with paper form, got kicked off the radio station, jeopardized my job, getting banned from all these churches. I could go on and on with a long list of names that one day there's going to be some demands towards explanations. How come you let this happen? How come you done what you done, or you didn't do what you know that you should have done?
by the charges that we've seen against these officers who are now currently in jail. They're very serious charges. Chief Best, I'm hoping you can respond to what Charles just said.
Yeah, well, first I'd have to agree that it's completely inexcusable, but I do think that there has been a lot of work over the years to try to make sure that the training and the recruitment and the hiring process gets the right people in. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, and this is a tragedy. My heart breaks for the victim here and for the families and the friends, but I do think a lot of work is being done, and that we are trying to move forward in a positive way.
All right, we will watch this story. We will await this video. Again, Antonia is saying probably tomorrow when the video will be released, and by all accounts, for those who have seen it, it's going to be bad. So clearly, a lot of people on alert as this comes down. Charles and Chief Carmen Best, thank you so much, Charles Coleman. We appreciate it, and we've got new economic numbers today. So
good luck to all of us. Good luck to all of us, as we're steadily digging our holes deeper and deeper and deeper. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go in the future. And shalom.